The evening began inside a modest concert hall filled with parents, teachers, and community members who had gathered to support a local music program. And the mood was calm, hopeful, and warm as people took their seats and spoke quietly with those beside them, while soft lights reflected off the polished wooden floor, and the grand piano waited silently at the center of the stage, creating a sense of expectation that felt gentle rather than dramatic. Among the children seated near the front was a small girl who sat close to her mother, holding her hands together tightly in her lap. And she looked around the room with wide, curious eyes, taking in the unfamiliar space, the tall ceiling, the rows of chairs, and the quiet excitement in the air. And although she had practiced music at home, and in lessons, she had never been on a stage like this before, and no one had come expecting her to play that night. The event organizer, a longtime music instructor, had planned the evening carefully, yet one part of the program remained open, a short performance meant to involve a student volunteer. And as the program moved forward, the instructor explained that a child from the audience would be invited to play something simple, just a short piece to celebrate young learners and encourage confidence. And while many children shifted nervously in their seats, the small girl remained still, listening closely. Her mother noticed how focused she looked and gently asked if she wanted to try, but the girl did not answer right away. She had always been quiet, preferring to listen before speaking, and music for her was something private, something she expressed best through sound rather than words. And although she loved the piano, the idea of playing in front of so many people felt overwhelming. The instructor scanned the audience, looking not for the most confident child, but for someone who seemed attentive and calm. And when his eyes met the small girl, he noticed her stillness, and the way she watched the stage with complete focus, and something about her presence suggested readiness even if she did not yet know it herself. And after a brief pause, he invited her by name, which surprised her and her mother alike. The room shifted as people turned to look, and a soft murmur passed through the audience. And the girl froze for a moment, unsure if she had heard correctly, and her mother squeezed her hand, offering reassurance without pressure. And slowly the girl stood up, feeling her legs tremble as she stepped into the aisle and walked toward the stage, guided gently by the instructor who kept his movements slow and encouraging. As she climbed the steps and approached the piano, she felt the weight of many eyes, yet she also felt something familiar, the quiet presence of the instrument, which reminded her of evenings at home practicing while the world outside grew still. And when she sat down on the bench, her feet barely reached the floor, and the piano keys stretched out before her like a language she understood deeply. The hall grew quiet, not because of expectation, but because everyone sensed the importance of giving her space. And the instructor stepped back, allowing her to take the moment fully as she adjusted her posture and placed her hands above the keys and took a breath that steadied her thoughts. And in that instant, the noise of the room faded from her awareness. She did not rush or look for approval. Instead, she focused on the keys and began to play softly at first, allowing the melody to form naturally. And the sound that filled the room was clear and gentle, and carried a depth that surprised those listening, because it was not rushed or uncertain, but thoughtful and controlled, as if she were telling a story she knew well. As the music continued, the audience leaned in, listening closely, and the small girl played with a calm confidence that grew with each note. And although her hands were small, her touch was deliberate and expressive, and the melody unfolded with warmth and emotion that seemed far beyond her years, and people exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing something unexpected and sincere. Her mother watched with tears in her eyes, not from shock, but from recognition, because she saw her child fully present, doing what she loved without fear. And the instructor stood quietly nearby, feeling grateful that he had trusted his instinct and allowed this moment to happen naturally. When the final notes settled into silence, the girl lifted her hands gently and remained still for a moment, as if listening to the echo within herself, and the room stayed quiet just long enough to honor what had been shared. And no one yet knew that this simple invitation would mark the beginning of a story that would be remembered long after the evening ended. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. The silence that followed her final note felt deeper than anyone expected, and the small girl remained seated at the piano with her hands resting softly in her lap, as if she were still inside the music and not yet ready to return to the room around her. And for a brief moment, no one moved or spoke, because the sound she had created lingered in a way that demanded respect rather than reaction. Then the applause began, slowly and gently at first, as if people were unsure whether it was right to break the stillness. And soon it spread through the hall, growing warmer and more confident, until the entire room was filled with clapping that was not loud but heartfelt, and the girl looked up, startled by the response, and searched the crowd until her eyes found her mother, who smiled through tears and nodded softly. The instructor stepped forward and thanked her quietly without making a show of it, and he guided her carefully off the bench and back toward the front row. And as she walked, she felt a strange mix of relief and confusion, because she had not played to impress anyone. She had simply played the way she always did, and she did not fully understand why everyone seemed so moved. Once seated again beside her mother, she felt her heart still racing, yet her breathing began to slow, and her mother wrapped an arm around her shoulders without saying anything, knowing words were unnecessary. And around them, people whispered to one another, sharing looks of surprise and admiration, yet no one leaned in too close or made the girl feel overwhelmed. And the respect in the room was quiet but strong. As the program continued, other planned activities resumed, yet the energy had changed, and the audience listened differently, more attentively, as if reminded of why they had come. And the instructor spoke briefly about the importance of nurturing young talent. But he did not single the girl out again, understanding that the moment had already spoken for itself. The girl listened from her seat, feeling both proud and shy, and she replayed the music in her mind, wondering if she had made mistakes and remembering places where her fingers had hesitated. Yet none of that seemed to matter now, because the feeling she had while playing stayed with her stronger than any concern. And she realized that the piano had felt like a safe place even on a stage. After the event ended, families gathered their belongings and conversations filled the hall once more, and several people approached the instructor, quietly asking about the girl and expressing how deeply her playing had affected them. And he responded, simply saying that sometimes children show us more than we expect when given trust and space. A few parents smiled at the girl as they passed, offering gentle words of encouragement, but no one overwhelmed her with praise, and this allowed her to remain grounded and calm. And as she left the hall holding her mother's hand, she looked back once at the piano on the stage, feeling a connection to it that now felt larger than before. On the drive home, the girl remained mostly quiet, looking out the window as streetlights passed, and her mother asked how she felt. And after a moment she said that it felt the same as playing at home, only louder. And her mother smiled, realizing that this was exactly what made it special, because the girl had not changed herself to meet the moment, she had simply been herself. That night after dinner, the girl returned to the piano at home without being asked and played the same piece again, slowly, carefully, as if exploring it from a new place, and her mother listened from another room, noticing a subtle difference, not in skill, but in confidence. And the girl seemed more settled, more aware of the sound she was creating. Over the following days, the memory of the event stayed with the girl, not as pressure, but as curiosity, and she asked more questions during her lessons, wanting to understand how music could make people feel so deeply. And her teacher noticed her increased focus and willingness to explore emotion rather than just accuracy. For the adults who had been present that evening, the moment became a quiet reference point, a reminder that talent often appears without warning, and that encouragement can change the course of a young life. And for the small girl, it marked the first time she realized that something she loved privately could also touch others in ways she did not yet fully understand. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. In the days that followed, the small girl returned to her normal routine of school, homework, and piano practice. Yet something within her had subtly changed, even if she could not fully name it. And when she sat at the piano, she no longer felt as though she was practicing only for herself or for lessons, but as if she was discovering how sound could carry feeling beyond the room she was in. At school, her teachers noticed that she seemed more attentive and thoughtful during music activities. And when asked to play, she did so with the same quiet focus she had shown on stage, and other children began to watch her more closely, not out of competition but curiosity, because there was something calm and sincere about the way she approached music. Her piano teacher also sensed the shift during their next lesson, and instead of pushing her through exercises, the teacher asked her how she felt when she played at the concert, and the girl paused before answering, and said that it felt like talking without speaking. And this simple description stayed with the teacher, who realized that the child was beginning to understand music as expression rather than performance. At home, her mother remained careful not to place new expectations on her, and continued to treat practice time as something joyful rather than demanding. And this allowed the girl to explore freely, sometimes repeating a single phrase until it felt right, and other times experimenting with dynamics and tone in ways she had not done before. The memory of the applause did not linger in her mind as excitement, but as warmth, and she remembered how quiet the room had become and how safe she felt in that stillness. And this memory gave her courage during moments when she felt unsure or shy in other parts of her life, because she knew she could return to that feeling through music. Meanwhile, the instructor from the event shared the experience with colleagues, not as a story of surprise, but as an example of what can happen when children are trusted and given room to grow. And this led to small changes in future programs, allowing more spontaneous participation and less rigid structure. For the community, the girl became a quiet symbol of possibility, though she herself remained unaware of this role. And for her, the world felt largely the same, except that music now felt like a bridge between her inner thoughts and the people around her. And she sensed that this bridge would continue to grow stronger with time. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As weeks passed, the small girl continued to grow into her relationship with music in a way that felt natural rather than forced, and her practice sessions became moments she looked forward to instead of tasks to complete. And she began to sit at the piano even when no one reminded her, allowing her hands to explore melodies she had not been assigned and sounds that reflected her mood. Her piano teacher adjusted lessons, gently focusing less on strict structure and more on listening and expression. And this approach helped the girl feel trusted and capable. And she responded by paying closer attention to how each note connected to the next, and how small changes in touch could change the feeling of a piece. And this awareness deepened her connection to the instrument. At school, she remained quiet, but classmates slowly began to see her differently, and some asked her about the piano with genuine interest, and she answered simply without exaggeration. And although she did not seek attention, she no longer tried to disappear, and this balance helped her feel more comfortable being herself. Her mother noticed that music was influencing her confidence beyond the piano, and she spoke more clearly when expressing her needs and showed patience when learning new things, and these changes were subtle yet meaningful. And they reassured her mother that the experience on stage had strengthened her rather than pressured her. The instructor from the event invited the girl and her family to attend future programs, not to perform, but to observe and learn. And during these visits, the girl watched older students play and felt inspired rather than intimidated, and she began to imagine what her own journey might look like over time. Music slowly became a steady presence in her life, not as something extraordinary, but as something grounding. And she learned that being chosen that night was not about proving anything, but about being open when an opportunity appeared. And this understanding stayed with her, quietly guiding her forward. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As the months moved forward, the small girl found herself thinking about music in moments when she was not playing, and melodies appeared in her mind, while she walked to school or sat quietly before sleep, and these sounds felt like companions rather than distractions. And she began to understand that music was becoming part of how she experienced the world. Her teacher introduced her to new pieces that were slightly more challenging, yet she approached them with patience instead of frustration. And when she struggled, she did not pull away but slowed down, listening carefully. And this change impressed those around her, because it showed maturity that could not be taught through technique alone. At home, her family continued to support her, gently attending recitals and lessons without comparison or pressure, and this allowed her to feel secure in her efforts. And she learned that improvement did not need to be rushed, and that joy could exist alongside discipline, and this balance helped her grow steadily. One afternoon during a small school gathering, she was asked to play again, and this time she felt nervous but not afraid. And she remembered the quiet moment before her first public performance, and used that memory to steady herself. And as she played, she felt the same sense of calm connection, and the audience responded with attentive silence. Afterward, she did not feel overwhelmed by praise, because she had learned that the value of playing came from within and not from reaction. And this understanding protected her from fear, and allowed her to remain grounded as opportunities slowly appeared. The girl began to see that being chosen once had opened a door, but it was her choice to continue walking forward. And she did so quietly, with curiosity and care, knowing that music would guide her step by step without asking her to rush. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As the girl continued her journey with music, the sixth part of her story unfolded in a way that felt deeper and more meaningful than any single performance. And this phase was not defined by stages or applause, but by steady growth that touched every part of her life, and those around her began to notice how music was shaping her character as much as her skill. She started to understand discipline not as pressure but as care. And when she practiced, she did so with intention, listening closely to her own playing and adjusting gently rather than forcing progress. And this patience allowed her to develop a strong connection with the piano that felt personal and honest. And she learned that improvement came from attention rather than speed. Her teacher now trusted her instincts and often asked her what she felt about a piece before offering guidance, and this approach gave the girl confidence in her own judgment and helped her feel respected. And she began to take responsibility for her learning, choosing which passages to focus on and setting small goals that felt achievable. Outside of music, the girl became more observant and thoughtful, and her parents noticed that she listened more carefully during conversations and responded with clarity and calm. And when she faced challenges at school, she approached them with the same steady mindset she used at the piano, slowing down and working through problems step by step. One afternoon, the instructor from the original event visited her lesson and listened quietly as she played, and he recognized a change that went beyond technical improvement. And her music carried a sense of intention and emotional awareness that could not be taught directly. And he realized that the moment when she was invited to play had unlocked something that continued to grow. The girl was later invited to participate in a small ensemble with other young musicians, and at first she felt unsure about playing with others because she was used to expressing herself alone. But she soon discovered that music could be a shared conversation, and this experience taught her how to listen as much as play and how to adjust her sound to support others. Through these group sessions, she developed empathy and cooperation, learning that her role mattered but did not need to dominate. And this lesson carried into her friendships where she became more open and supportive, and people around her felt comfortable in her presence because she listened without judgment. Her family remained her strongest foundation, and they celebrated effort rather than outcome, and this allowed her to explore new challenges without fear of failure. And when she felt tired or frustrated, they reminded her that rest was part of growth, and this balance protected her love for music. As time went on, she began to understand that the astonishment people felt that first night was not about surprise alone, but about sincerity. And she realized that when she played with honesty, people responded naturally. And this understanding shaped how she approached every opportunity afterward. The girl no longer thought about being chosen as something rare or lucky, but as a moment when trust was offered and accepted, and she learned that trust carried responsibility to remain true to herself. And this realization gave her quiet strength. Music became her way of making sense of emotions she could not yet name, and through it, she learned resilience, patience, and courage. And those qualities began to define her more than talent ever could. This part of her story showed that the true impact of that evening did not lie in the reaction of the crowd, but in the steady, confident person she was becoming. And it was clear that whatever path she chose, music would remain a guiding presence, shaping her future with grace and depth. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. Content without them. As the girl moved further along her path, the seventh part of her story revealed how deeply music had become woven into her sense of identity and daily life. And this stage was less about learning new skills, and more about understanding who she was becoming through the choices she made quietly and consistently. She began to notice that people listened to her differently now, not because she demanded attention, but because her presence carried calm focus. And this was true whether she sat at the piano or spoke in a classroom. And she did not try to change herself to meet expectations. Instead, she trusted the steady rhythm she had developed. With opportunities appeared slowly and naturally: a request to play at a small school event, an invitation to join a youth music group, a chance to accompany another student, and each time she felt the familiar flutter of nervousness. But it no longer stopped her from moving forward, because she had learned that fear did not disappear, it softened when met with patience. Her teacher continued to guide her with care, reminding her that music was not a race, and that comparison could weaken joy, and these words stayed with the girl, especially when she met others who played faster or louder or with more visible confidence. And instead of shrinking, she focused on her own voice, knowing it had value even in its quiet strength. At home, music became a shared experience rather than a private one, and sometimes she played while her family listened, and sometimes they spoke about how certain melodies made them feel. And this exchange helped her understand that music could connect people without explanation, and that connection felt more important than perfection. She also learned to step back when needed, choosing rest without guilt and silence without fear. And this balance protected her from exhaustion and kept her curiosity alive. And she understood that growth required space as much as effort. One meaningful moment came when a younger student approached her after a lesson and asked how she stayed calm while playing, and the girl thought carefully before answering, and said that she listened first to the music and then to herself. And this simple insight surprised her because she realized she had learned something she could share. From that point, she became a quiet example to others, not by instruction, but by consistency and kindness. And people felt encouraged by her presence, because she did not compete, she invited, and this quality shaped the environment around her, making it more open and supportive. The memory of the night she was chosen to play remained with her, not as a highlight to repeat, but as a reminder that trust could change direction. And she understood that someone had seen potential not as a promise of greatness, but as readiness to try, and this understanding gave her gratitude rather than pressure. As she grew older, she began to think about music not only as something she did, but as something she might carry forward in different ways, teaching, collaborating, or simply continuing to play for herself. And she did not rush to define the future, knowing that clarity would come with time. This part of her story showed how astonishment fades, but influence remains, and how a single moment of belief can echo quietly across years, shaping confidence, values, and purpose. And the girl moved forward grounded and aware, carrying music not as a performance but as a companion. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As the girl reached the eighth part of her story, her life no longer felt divided between before and after the moment. She was chosen to play because that experience had settled naturally into who she was, and how she moved through the world, and what once felt surprising now felt steady and earned through time, patience, and care. She no longer thought of herself as the small girl who astonished everyone, because that label belonged to the memory of others, not to her own understanding of her journey. And instead she saw herself as someone who listened deeply, worked honestly, and stayed connected to what mattered, and music was simply one of the ways those qualities expressed themselves. As she grew older, her relationship with the piano continued to evolve, and there were periods of rapid growth and others of quiet reflection. And she learned to respect both, knowing that progress was not always visible, and that silence could be just as important as sound. And this wisdom helped her navigate challenges beyond music with balance and calm. She began to take part in community events not as a featured performer, but as a contributor, playing alongside others, supporting younger students, and sometimes choosing to remain in the background. And she discovered that fulfillment did not always come from being seen, but from being useful, present, and sincere. Her teacher often spoke of her as an example not of talent alone but of character. And when new students struggled with fear or doubt, she was sometimes asked to play or simply to sit nearby, and her quiet confidence offered reassurance without words. And she understood then that influence could be gentle and still powerful. At home, her family noticed how grounded she had become, and conversations with her reflected thoughtfulness beyond her years. And when asked about her goals, she spoke honestly, saying she loved music and wanted it to remain part of her life in whatever form felt right. And this openness showed maturity shaped by trust rather than pressure. The original instructor from the event saw her again years later at another program, and he recognized the same calm presence that had first drawn his attention. And he felt grateful, knowing that a simple choice to invite rather than overlook had allowed something meaningful to grow. And he shared this reflection with others, encouraging them to notice quiet readiness wherever it appeared. For the girl, the memory of walking onto the stage that night remained vivid, but it no longer carried uncertainty, and instead it reminded her that courage often begins with listening, and that being chosen was less important than choosing to respond with honesty. She understood that astonishment fades quickly, but growth continues quietly, and that the most important changes are not always visible to others. And this understanding kept her grounded as she moved through new experiences and decisions. Music remained her companion, whether she played daily or stepped away for a time, and she trusted that it would always be there when needed, because it was no longer tied to performance or approval, but to understanding and expression. As she looked ahead, she did so without urgency, knowing that her path did not need to be extraordinary to be meaningful, and that the value of her journey lay in consistency, care, and connection. And whatever role music played, it would be guided by those same principles. The story that began with a small girl being picked to play piano did not end with applause or recognition. It continued through years of quiet choices, steady growth, and deep listening. And in that way, it became not just a moment that astonished everyone, but a life shaped by trust and sincerity. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them.